I twisted the kitchen faucet, expecting the usual morning gush of cold water. Nothing. Confused, I twisted it harder. A few sad drops sputtered out, then silence. I frowned and moved to the bathroom sink. Same thing. The shower, dead dry. Panic started slow, then sped through my veins like ice water. Was there a pipe burst? A neighborhood outage? I hurried outside, still in my slippers, and scanned the houses up and down the street. Sprinklers hissed lazily across manicured lawns. I could hear the faint sound of someone washing their car 2 houses down. Birds chirped in the trees, blissfully unaware. It was just me. Only my house. Something wasn't right. I sprinted to the side of my house where the main valve was, bent down, heart pounding. And that's when I saw it. A clean mechanical cap over the community water connection. New hardware. Professionally installed. Someone had shut me off. Not a break. Not a deliberate act. I stood there staring, anger blooming in my chest like wildfire. I already knew who had done it. I'd seen the smug looks from the HOA board at last week's meeting. Heard their veiled threats about compliance and consequences. This wasn't an accident. This was war. They thought they could bully me into submission. That cutting off my water would make me bend the knee, beg for forgiveness. They had no idea who they were messing with. I dusted off my hands, straightened my back, and looked toward the rising sun. They wanted a fight? Good, because I was just getting started. When I first bought the house on Willow Creek Lane, I thought I was finally catching a break. It wasn't perfect. Far from it, actually. The roof needed patching. The yard was wild and overgrown, and the interior looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the late 90s. But I saw potential. A little love, a lot of sweat. And this house would be something truly special. My own little sanctuary and the neighborhood itself. It looked like a postcard. White picket fences, kids riding bikes, golden retrievers bounding across lawns. Everyone smiled, waved. It felt safe, peaceful. Of course, I didn't factor in the homeowners association. At first, it was small things. I received a friendly reminder in my mailbox about my lawn. The grass was 2 inches too high. Then came a warning about the color of my mailbox not being community compliant. It needed to be eggshell white, not ivory. I laughed it off at first. Figured it was just a few overly enthusiastic rule enforcers keeping up appearances. But then I met Karen. She introduced herself the day I moved in. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched atop a perfectly lacquered helmet of hair. Karen was the president of the HOA, and she wasted no time informing me of standards and expectations. I nodded politely, half listening, thinking it was all harmless. It wasn't. It quickly became clear that Karen and her little board of minions had decided I didn't fit in. Maybe it was because I was single. Maybe it was because I wasn't the type to gossip at the local bake sale or join their endless stream of committees. Or maybe it was simply because I didn't grovel. I minded my business, worked on my house, and refused to get drawn into their games. That didn't sit well with them. The fines started rolling in. $50 for a visible tool left in my yard while I worked on landscaping. $75 for non-approved paint samples when I tested colors on my porch. $100 for my garbage can being left by the curb 10 minutes too long after pickup. Each violation was more ridiculous than the last. I tried appealing them, calm. Professional emails citing their own bylaw language. It didn't matter. Every meeting I attended felt like stepping into a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. The worst part was Karen's smile, that smug little smirk she wore whenever I tried to defend myself. Like she was daring me to fight back, knowing she held the rulebook and the gavel. And for a while, I tried to play nice. I paid the smaller fines, corrected the issues, thinking it would end if I just stayed quiet long enough. It didn't. It only escalated when I stood my ground over an unfair $250 fine for unauthorized exterior modifications, a claim based entirely on me installing a tiny vegetable garden in my own backyard. A backyard nobody could even see unless they climbed my fence. That's when the real harassment began. Petty as it seemed, the HOA had power. They controlled utilities, landscaping approvals, external aesthetics. They could make your life miserable in 100 little ways if you refused to fall in line, and I had made it clear. I wasn't one of their sheep. Maybe I should have seen it coming. Maybe I should have realized that people like Karen didn't just stop when you ignored them. They plotted, they waited, and when they found their opportunity, they struck. Cutting off my water supply wasn't a random act of spite. It was a message. But if they thought they were going to run me off like some scared little rabbit, they had another thing coming. The first few days without water were pure hell. At first, I thought maybe I could tough it out, that I'd find a simple fix or that the HOA would realize they'd crossed a line. Neither happened. Instead, every day turned into a humiliating circus. I found myself dragging 5-gallon jugs from a neighbor's spigot, a neighbor who was kind enough to let me fill up quietly at night so the HOA wouldn't catch wind. I hauled those heavy containers into my house one by one, just to have enough to flush toilets, wash dishes, or brush my teeth. Showers became an elaborate ritual involving buckets, boiling kettles, and prayers that I wouldn't slip and break my neck. It wasn't sustainable. Eventually, I was forced to pay for a temporary connection to the city water supply. It cost me a fortune: connection fees, service charges, inflated utility rates, money I hadn't budgeted for, money that bled my savings dry one day at a time. Every time I turned on the tap, a little voice in my head whispered, "They did this to you. They're laughing about it right now." I started avoiding my neighbors. I stopped working on my house. My dream, my sanctuary, had become a prison. And it was all because a handful of petty, power-drunk busybodies decided they didn't like me. There were nights I sat at my kitchen table, staring at listings online, seriously considering putting the house up for sale. It felt like they'd won, but then, like most desperate turning points, inspiration didn't come gently. It hit me square between the eyes one random evening while scrolling through DIY forums. A thread about solar-powered water pumps, off-grid, independent, immune to outside control. My heart started pounding as I clicked deeper. Articles, videos, tutorials. Entire systems designed for people who lived miles away from municipal services. People who didn't need anyone else to survive. The idea wrapped itself around my mind like a lifeline. What if I didn't just reconnect to water? What if I made it so they could never control it again? By the time midnight rolled around, I had a full-blown plan forming. I was sketching diagrams on the back of an old grocery receipt, pricing parts, listing suppliers. It wouldn't be cheap. It wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt determination. If they wanted a war, they were going to get it. Not a shouting match, not some petty back and forth. No, I was going to beat them at their own game. Quietly, legally, and so thoroughly that they'd choke on their smug little rule books. I shut my laptop, took a deep breath, and smiled. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I started researching like my life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. I devoured everything I could find on solar energy, off-grid living, private water systems. I lurked on DIY forums where rural homeowners shared tips about drawing water from wells with nothing but sunlight and stubbornness. I watched grainy YouTube videos at 2 a.m., scribbling notes about flow rates, tank capacities, and battery banks. My search history could have easily been mistaken for someone planning a moon landing. When I finally had a basic understanding, I started reaching out. Quietly, cautiously. I emailed small solar companies in nearby counties, ones that didn't advertise heavily, ones that specialized in custom solutions for people who, like me, didn't want too many questions asked. The plan came together faster than I expected. I'd install a private system, solar panels to collect energy, batteries to store it, and a high-efficiency water pump to draw from the old, unused well. On my property, back when the neighborhood was built, every lot had a private well dug as a backup. Most had been sealed off or forgotten once city water took over. Mine wasn't. It just needed the right coaxing. Over the next few weeks, I quietly ordered the equipment piece by piece. 4 solar panels, 2 deep cycle batteries, a durable submersible pump, 500-gallon polyethylene storage tank, piping, wiring, fittings, and a discreet little shed to house the system. Keeping it hidden became an art form. Deliveries were scheduled for early mornings or late evenings. I worked strange shifts at my day job anyway, so no one batted an eye. When boxes started appearing at odd hours, I told curious neighbors it was landscaping supplies. The installers I hired showed up disguised as lawn maintenance crews. Khakis, polos, sunglasses. They looked exactly like half the service workers who roamed the neighborhood on any given day. They even stuck little magnetic green thumb landscaping signs on their trucks for added authenticity. It was almost fun, sneaking around under the HOA's nose, hiding my rebellion in plain sight. Karen and her patrol squad would occasionally cruise by in their golf carts, clipboards clutched tight, eyes scanning for infractions. I made sure to smile and wave every time. Let them think they had me beat. Let them believe I was licking my wounds. Meanwhile, behind the 8-foot privacy fence I'd installed months ago, after a bitter fight about unsightly yard clutter, a revolution was brewing. The first time we tested the system, I held my breath. The pump hummed to life, low and powerful. Water surged through the pipes, filling the tank faster than I dared hope. I ran inside, twisted the faucet, and there it was. Cool, clear, perfect. Water I controlled. Water they couldn't touch. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Instead, I just stood there with my hands on the counter, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Victory. Freedom. Every time I passed the kitchen sink after that, I caught myself smiling. And every time I saw Karen's golf cart lurking on the street, clipboard in hand, I smiled even wider. Because the best part? They had no idea that their little stunt had backfired spectacularly. No idea that I had gone from dependent to invincible. No idea that the next move was mine, and it was going to be glorious. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted to bury them under the weight of their own arrogance, and very, very soon, I would. Installation day felt like orchestrating a heist. The solar panels went up behind the tall privacy fencing, perfectly angled to soak in the southern sun. The crew, still in their landscaper disguises, worked like a well-oiled machine, hooking up the submersible pump to my old private, and routing the lines directly into the new water tank. From there, piping ran discreetly into the house. No mess, no visible indicators. By sundown, everything was in place. I stood inside, hand trembling slightly, and turned on the kitchen tap. For a split second, there was silence. Then a mighty gush of crystal-clear water roared out, slapping against the sink with almost joyful violence. The pressure was perfect, better than it had ever been. I laughed out loud, giddy. I stuck my hand under the stream, splashing it across my face like some medieval pilgrim discovering a holy spring. Months of humiliation, rage, and helplessness washed off me in an instant. This water was mine. Not the city's, not the HOA's. Mine. Word started to spread among the neighbors almost immediately. At first, just glances, the retired couple. Across the street giving me small, secretive thumbs-ups when Karen wasn't looking. The teenage kid next door asking, "Dude, how'd you get your water back?" I kept it quiet. Just smiled and shrugged, playing innocent. But the HOA board? They weren't so easily fooled. Karen's patrols started getting more frequent. Clipboards flashing. Phones out, snapping pictures of my driveway, my fence, the panels they couldn't quite see over the slats. It didn't take long before the first letter arrived. Notice of mandatory property inspection. Signed, of course, by Karen herself. I crumpled it with one hand and tossed it straight into the recycling bin. The next day, Karen showed up in person. She knocked like she wanted to break the door down, standing there in her power suit and pearls. 2 other board members flanking her like henchmen. "We need to inspect your property immediately." she barked, skipping any pretense of politeness. I smiled warmly. I'm afraid I have to decline. Her mouth flapped open and shut like a stranded fish. You're required to… Nope, I said, keeping my tone light. According to state law, unless you have evidence of a bylaw violation or a warrant, you can't enter private property without the homeowner's consent. One of the henchmen pulled out a binder and started flipping through pages furiously. Karen's face turned a shade of crimson I hadn't seen outside of cherry orchards. You'll be fined, she screeched. You'll be sued. You'll be… Actually, I said, pulling out a folder I had prepared for this very moment. You'll find that everything installed is 100% compliant. I handed her copies of the permits, state statutes, and letters from both the county and my lawyer, all confirming that solar installations on private property, legal, utilizing an existing private well for personal, non-commercial use, legal, no HOA bylaws restricting private energy or water systems, also legal. Karen's hand shook as she flipped through the pages. Her henchmen exchanged awkward glances. Have a great day, I said sweetly and gently closed the door in her face. But Karen wasn't finished. The HOA called an emergency meeting 2 nights later. I got the notice hand-delivered, probably, to make sure I couldn't claim I missed it. The entire neighborhood turned out. I showed up early, sitting right in the front row, arms folded across my chest. Karen stood at the podium, red-faced and furious, launching into a tirade about rogue, homeowners, and threats to community standards. When she finally called me out by name, trying to paint me as some kind of anarchist, I stood up calmly, and I pulled out more than just legal documents. I pulled out the receipts, copies of every unfair fine they'd levied against me, screenshots of emails where they hinted at making things difficult if I didn't comply, video footage from my security cameras showing HOA board members, including Karen, inspecting my property from the sidewalk late at night, flashlights in hand. A murmur ran through the crowd. Neighbors exchanged looks. Someone whispered just loud enough for others to hear. This isn't about water. They've been harassing him for months. Another voice. They cut off his water supply. Isn't that illegal? Karen tried to interrupt, tried to shout over me, but the room wasn't listening anymore. The tide had turned. People who'd been too afraid to speak before started chiming in. Their own stories of petty fines, veiled threats, HOA meetings that felt more like tribunals than community discussions. By the time I was finished, Karen's carefully constructed authority was crumbling before everyone's eyes. She stood there, clutching the podium like it was the only thing keeping her upright, mouth working soundlessly. Someone clapped, then another, and then, before Karen could regain control, half the room was applauding. Not for her, for me. I sat back down, heart thudding, with adrenaline and satisfaction. They had tried to break me. Instead, they'd exposed themselves and I wasn't going anywhere. The fallout was swift and brutal. For them, not for me. Within a week of the meeting, the HOA backed off completely. No more nasty letters, no more clipboard patrols, no more bogus fines showing up in my mailbox. It was as if they had suddenly remembered they were supposed to be managing a community, not running a dictatorship. Karen, however, didn't recover so easily. Formal complaints started piling up against her, not just from me, but from neighbors emboldened by what had happened. Years of petty tyranny, recorded and documented, now bubbling to the surface like a long overdue reckoning. She tried to cling to power, of course. Bullies always do. But after a few months of escalating pressure, she resigned for personal reasons. Her little announcement slipped into a bland community newsletter as if it was no big deal. I heard through the grapevine that she moved out not long after that. Couldn't stand the whispers. The dirty looks. The knowledge that her empire of fear had crumbled into dust. Good riddance. In her absence, the neighborhood transformed. The new HOA board, made up of people who actually lived here and cared about the community, wasn't perfect, but they were reasonable. No more absurd fines for grass being 1/4 inch too long. No more threats over the color of a front door. No more treating homeowners like rebellious children needing discipline. People started talking again, waving from porches, hosting barbecues, actually being neighbors instead of wary competitors in some stupid suburban survival game. As for me, the peace was sweeter than I could have imagined. My house, once viewed as a problem property because of Karen's smear campaign, suddenly became the envy of the block. Self-sufficiency wasn't a red flag anymore. It was a badge of honor. Real estate agents even started whispering that homes with private energy and water systems were skyrocketing in value. Apparently, more and more buyers were looking for independence from city utilities, and I had beaten the trend by accident. Funny how that works. But money wasn't the real prize. The real prize was standing in my kitchen every morning, turning on the tap and knowing absolutely, undeniably, that the water pouring out was mine, that no one could take it from me again. I had fought back. I had stood my ground when every easy path had screamed at me to run, and I had won, not just for myself, but for every neighbor who had ever been bullied into silence, for every homeowner who thought they had no choice but to bow and scrape too. An HOA drunk on power. I proved them wrong, and every time the sun rises hitting those sleek solar panels behind my fence, I remember one thing. In the end, cutting off my water supply only fueled my fire. Literally.